Hello everyone, I hope you are all doing well. I can see we have quite a few viewers already. That's very nice to see. Quite a few people that we know already and quite a few new ones that we have not been in touch with yet. Welcome back to another Clang webinar. In our strange new times where we cannot do that face to face, how we are used to doing it. But as mentioned in our last few events, we want to use the time for all of us to get in touch, to update our skill sets, and possibly find some new and creative ways to use the technology that we have at hand. Today's topic is Clang streaming, strategies for an immersive streaming experience. That's a little bit of a, I would say a side use or a different kind. We could use our tools, the Clang tools. In this case, not for in-ear monitoring directly on stage for the musicians, but also for streaming concerts live. Right now, of course, we cannot do any concerts. We cannot do any touring, and also houses of worship are not able to gather their congregations like they're used to do it. So everybody's looking right now to find new and interesting ways to stay in touch with fans and congregation and to make it, to get the best out of the situation that we're in right now. So, Clang streaming. What a lot of churches are doing right now, and bands and artists of all kinds, are remote concerts, web streamed concerts. So the goal is, of course, to bring whatever is happening on stage with the musicians in the best possible way to the listeners at home or on their mobile devices or wherever they are right now. Okay, so there are ways that we can immerse the people in a better way than it would be possible with just a stereo or, God forbid, a mono stream. I want to start off with showing you two examples. One of them would be an artist from Israel who did a bit more than a week ago a concert from Supper Club, and that was live streamed through Clang. Let's start with that one. If you don't wear headphones yet, now would be a good time to do that. Okay, so that was a really cool concert, and The advantage that the artist had by streaming through Klang, in this case it was a Klang DMI, was that the listeners are not just monitoring as bystanders, but they're actually immersed in the concert. So stuff is happening all around them. It feels more natural. It feels more like a concert experience and atmosphere than it would be possible in a pure stereo way. I want to show you one other example. That's from actually a few years ago. A recording studio in Germany, one of the really old legendary ones, did some live stream concerts where musicians, bands were invited to play there. The audience in the room was only 10 people, maybe just friends and some other people. But also the concert was streamed live to the internet. And the reason why I wanted to show you that one is that it can show you how a sound engineer can actually become a little bit more creatively involved in the sound experience there by using the extended panning capabilities of a binaural system. So let's listen to Ariel. Okay, so as you hopefully have heard through your headphones, the guitar and the vocals and some effects were just spinning around the head to create a little bit more of an stronger experience on the way that the performance was done, especially with the more edgy and quite crazy end of that song. So let's talk about how we can actually make that happen. There are several ways. There's not one way that is the correct way, but there are different ways that give you different possibilities and options to work creatively with the streaming concert. So let's go back to the start. The easiest way to do it is by just replacing the PA with a streaming server. So we would get the signals from the band into our mixing board, and the output of the mixing board would be connected to the streaming server. So far, so easy. But as mentioned before, that will only be a stereo mix. And even if that will be more or less the same stereo mix that we would send on a PA, it's not the same thing, because a PA resonates in the room. It creates a room. It creates an atmosphere. And that is what is one big part of the charm of having live concerts. A simple way to integrate a Klang product there would be to send the signals from the band into our console, like we always would do. And then we use direct outs or submixes, or a combination of direct outs and submixes, and send them into our Klang device as inputs there. Usually we would do that as post-fader signals. The reason for that is quite simple. We would be able to work in the main layer of our mixing board in exactly the same way that we would do in a standalone version. So moving a fader up would also, of course, affect the direct out level that is going to Klang. And then the output of Klang is simply connected to a streaming server. Very simple. And that's where we get our spatialization and actually are able to bring everything around us. A slightly more flexible approach would be very similar. We're sending the band signals into our console. We're sending our direct outs into the Klang device. And now we return the Klang mix that we did into the console. And from there we send it to the web stream. The difference there is basically that we can use some summing processing on the Klang mix. It could be some compression, it could be some saturation, whatever we want to do. It's also a good way to be able to add other signals that are not going through Klang into the stream. That could be, for example, an announcer, it could be a pastor, it could be any sound effects or whatever we want to do with that. A more advanced option would be this one here. So again, we're sending the band channels into the console. The console is sending direct outs into Klang. And now, since every Klang device is able to feature multiple mixes, we can treat those mixes like subgroups. And those subgroups we send back into the console and mix them together there. And we can apply some bus processing, so like compression, for example, into those submixes, and from there we sum them together and send them out to the web stream. I have visualized that over here, so you can see multiple channels from the drums, for example, are going into the board. The direct outs from each of those channels are going into the Klang mixes. And the Klang mixes that I have assigned in here are basically a drum subgroup, a bass subgroup, a keyboard subgroup, a guitar subgroup, and a vocal subgroup. There can be, of course, completely different applications and different ways to do that. That is just basically only limited by your creativity in that case. But what we can do there is a lot of the tricks and tools and little ideas that we know from the studio world and some from some parts of the broadcast world, where not only we are using bus compression and all those tools on the mixes, but we can also work with ducking and all kinds of other things to make it even more immersive and more solid and, you know, post-production-y sounding, right? So, and then those mixes we return in the mixing board. It could be, depending on the kind of mixing board you're using, it could be input channels, it could be group inputs, or it could be merge inputs. Especially if we're using a Digico SD or Quantum Console, it would make sense to use merge inputs for that. I will get back to that in a little bit. I have prepared a little example. Let me show you how this could possibly be set up, for example. So as you can see, I have a drum submix where I have placed all the drums in a way that I like, or the musician or the producer likes. There's a parallel compression group for the drums, which is basically the same mix minus the cymbals and the hi-hat, where, you know, we can just compress it as hard as we want to just mix that together and have a parallel compression. There's a bass group, quite simple. There's a band group. In this case, there are just the keyboards and the guitar in there, a vocal group, and an effects group. Now, effects. That is quite an important part of the whole thing. Not only the vocal reverb and the drum reverb, or whatever we want to use, we can place in there. We can also use some kinds of ambient reverbs or ambience reflections to just create a little bit more of a room feeling that we have in here. And since we can just place them completely freely, we can design how we want that virtual room to sound. And those effects can just come externally from the mixing board, from an external reverb processor, whatever we want to do. But even more importantly would be ambience microphones. Don't forget about those, because even if we don't have an audience in the room necessarily, we still get a lot of the room energy, the room response, and the way that the room reacts to the music into the whole thing. In this case, I only have 2 ambience mics in there, but there's no rule that says you should only use 2. You can use multiple ambience microphones in there and place them in different regions of our head to just use the natural acoustics as much as we can, which is always cooler than just using a digital reverb that we can do. So let me show you how I set that up in the mixing board. Oops, 1 second. Here we go. Okay, so as you can see, I have created 6 auxes in this case, which I'm using as my subgroups. My drum group, my parallel group, bass group, band group, vocal group, and effects group. Let's go to the input channels. I have 2 layers here. My drums are over here, my bass, my keys, and my guitar. And on the second layer, I have my vocals, my ambience mics, and all my effect returns. As you can see, I have activated Clang using the Digico integration in here. You can see that with those little Clang icons in here. So the drums are going to my drum group and my parallel compression drum group. My bass is going to the bass group. My keys and my guitars are going to the band group. And my vocals are going to the vocal group and the effects to the effects group. Quite simple with that. The audio workflow basically is that we're sending direct outs from each channel into Clang. And then in our auxes, which I'm using as a kind of subgroup in this case, we're returning them into the merge inputs. If you want details on that, feel free to check out www.klang.com/digico. That gives you a little bit more of an impression on how the integrated workflow is working. And of course, we will follow up with a full integration setup video in the next couple of days. So there we can go into more details with that. Quick note on that side here. Let me just go back here so we can see each other. I'm showing it, of course, with the Digico console right now. And this is the most integrated way that you can work with it, especially since you can control every single parameter directly from the console surface. But you can replicate that workflow also with an S-Series, which does not feature the Clang integration, and even with any other mixing board. In this case, you would just, in the same way, send out the direct outs from each channel. You would return the mixes into empty channels or whichever format you're using there. And you would control the placement with an iPad or with Clang app on your computer. So that's a very simple way to integrate it in any kind of technical setup that you have. Let's go back to the mixing board. I did not mention one factor. So those auxes, in this case, since they are not able to go directly to the aux master, I'm just combining them with a matrix. And the matrix is then going out here on my matrix channels, which are connected to the streaming server. Quite simple with that. So why don't we just listen to this example for a second. Don't forget to wear your headphones now again.
Cried for you so many days and nights, waiting for you. And if we only had another chance, I'd love to hold you in my arms again. But I realize I hold on to nothing. There is nothing waiting for me. I'm crying out this pain, and it's driving me insane. I'll never be the same again. I'll never be the same. I cried for you so many days and nights, waiting for you. And if we only had another chance, I'd love to hold you in my arms again. But I realize I hold on to nothing. If you could bring my feelings to the top, we could be dancing till the music stopped. But I realize I hold on.
Okay. Back from the listening session. Let me just get back on my seat again. Okay. So, I think you all heard when we did the A/B comparison there that the stereo mix was all right. You know, we can work with that, but it's very dull and boring and lacking life compared to the immersive mix that we did in there. So, are there any questions that we have for this part of this this seminar? Okay, hey, I got one nice comment from Zeke. He loves the depth that you get when Klang is engaged. I would totally agree with that. You get much more detail out of all the signals in there, because simply they are not masking each other in the same way that stereo signals, which are laying on top of each other and basically are frequency-wise in the way of each other, would do. So with Klang, you just get much more openness with all that. So, by the way, the two examples that we heard at the beginning, the second one where you heard from this recording studio streaming concert, I'm sorry, that was basically using this simple version that I was mentioning before. That would be this one here. While the first example that I showed you before was using the submix and buzz version of all that. So, back to the questions. I think some questions are coming in already. James is asking, no, there we are. Can you run redundant Klang systems? Yeah, that wouldn't be a problem at all. So basically you would just add two Klang systems in there, send the direct outs to both of them, and if you are using a standalone version, you would basically just copy the mix settings to both of them. If you're working with the Digico integration, you can create a cascaded version of two units with that, and you would assign the same mixes or auxes that I have in this case to both of those servers, or to both of those Klang systems, and that would just keep both of them at the same state at all times. So the only thing you would have to do in case of a failure on one side is just switch the audio around with that, which you could easily do with a macro. I hope that answers the question. Let's see. Could you also use it as inserts? Not really, because you would need a stereo insert, which mono channels would not feature in this case. But basically, what we're doing is right now is a very similar way to how an insert would work. The only thing is that the insert return is not directly in the channel, but is coming in the merge input of the aux master. Okay, so more questions. Klang can use only Digico? No, absolutely not. With Digico, you get the deepest integration. You get all the controls directly from the surface of the console. With every other console brand or make, you would just use an external software to control the panning and possibly the level, for example, if you do that. But of course you can use it with all kinds of consoles. Todd says, I see you have like 10 subgroups. Not really, but I see why you get to that idea. Wait a second, let me just switch over here. So those auxes here, those 6 auxes that I have in here, are what I consider my subgroups in this case, while these are just reverb sense or effect sense. So they are basically using similar paths, but they're used in a different way. Okay, let's see. Okay, Marcus says, let me just read that. 1 second. Okay, so you didn't have the perception from the front. Okay. Now I have to see. We cannot go into all the details in here. But what you're probably referring to is that every human being has a little bit of a different head shape. So for 95% of all users, the Clang Hrtf or the Clang binaural processing will give you very exact positions already. There are some cases where you would have a little bit different perception with that. However, our brain is very good in adjusting to that within a couple of minutes. Let me explain to you why our brain does that constantly. Let's say, as you can see, I'm completely bald, right? There's no hair anymore. So if I go out and it's cold outside, I would probably wear a hat or a cap. And that might bend my ears a little bit. And by bending my ears, my natural spatialization or the perception of angles around me would be slightly distorted. So my brain needs to be always able to adjust to all kinds of changes to that. So it takes a few minutes, and after that it gets much more precise again. The same effect happens when you're using Clang device. Another factor that comes into play with that is that you're probably using over-ear headphones. I don't know the model that you're using, but if it's over the ear, it gives you a slightly less precise positioning. In-ears, even iPhone buds are already much more precise with that. But again, in all those factors, the natural adaptation of our brain to different spatializations comes into place. So that comes right away. And of course, the last point that is a very important one is that this is just a quick mix that I threw together here as an example. If you would be the engineer, Marco, and you would do the mix in there, and you would feel that this is not the way that it should be, or you would like to have some stuff somewhere else, you could always do that. That's the easiest thing to do. Okay. Let's see. There are more questions coming in. if you use plugins, is latency a problem with this tool? No. No, I wouldn't know why. Especially, I mean, if you're using plugins, we're talking about very small latencies, generally at least. So I don't see why this would create any issue. Especially when we're talking about streaming, even if there's like a millisecond extra on one channel, that wouldn't make any difference in a negative way. However, as with all things audio, your ears are the boss. So if you insert a plugin and you feel something is happening that I don't like, then just remove it or use something else. That gets me to another point. I will get back to that in a second. Okay, no front perception. That's an interesting one. We can go back to the example again and play around with it a little bit more in a second. Loads of compression. Yes, there's quite a bit of compression in this example. And that brings me to the point that I was just about to mention before. The stuff that you do or can do or should do or would want to do with those Clang submixes that we have in here, you can pretty much be creative with everything that you want to do. If you use compression, like a bus compression, you can do that. Just make sure to just verify with your ears if it actually works well and in a way that you like it. But a very important point is that you make sure that left and right channel of that compressor are linked. Otherwise, it would do weird stuff. Another point is if you use saturation. Saturation can mildden the effects that transients have in your audio, and transients are quite important for perception of placement. So if you use too much saturation, the perception of placement might become a little bit less precise, so watch that. Another point, what a lot of people tend to use on mix buses are stereo wideners. I would not use them in this case because, I mean, it's quite clear, since we can place everything all around us, where do you want to widen stuff if it's already everywhere? So usually those stereo wideners might have some weird effects. That said, again, as I mentioned before, your ears are the final reference point of that. So if you use a stereo widener and you feel that it has a cool or interesting or positive effect on that, why not use it? You're the engineers. So, that's an interesting one. The DMI card with the orange box of Digico will also work with other consoles. Yes, of course. Absolutely. The orange box is basically just a host for DMI cards. So if you have a DMI card for Clang and then a MADI or Dante or whatever input card in there, you can just combine that with every kind of mixing board. How many buses can I use at one time? That depends on the mixing board, of course, but let's say we're using a big board and we have enough buses there. It depends on the Clang device. So there are three immersive processors in our product line. The smallest one would be Clang 4, which can feature 5 mixes. The next bigger one would be Clang Fabrik, which has a flexible I/O. It can, for example, work with 56 inputs and 3 mixes, but it also could work with 24 inputs and 8 mixes. So it depends a little bit on that. And DMI Clang is featuring 16 mixes. So that will be the maximum that we could be using here. If you have a Fabrik, for example, and you want to use more mixes than it can do at one time in a single device, you can easily cascade multiple devices to get more mixes out of it. Okay, wait, there's another question in here. Which device is used to respect the panning of the musicians on stage? I assume you mean track the position of musicians on stage. Well, yes and no. So there are a number of trackers that are used in theater applications, and most of those speak OSC. Klang also speaks OSC, so it would probably be relatively easy to combine those systems. Another thing that is on the menu for Klang is a head tracking device, but that is not tracking the positioning on stage, but it would basically just be a interactive panning for the whole mix for one musician, which is not so much an application for what we're talking about today. For the regular in-ear monitoring application, it's a different story. That's a very good point by Zeke. Download the demo and play with it yourself. Yeah, so just go to our website, www.klang.com. You can download the app for your Mac, for your PC. You can find a link to the App Store to Apple to download it on your iPad, on iPhone. We integrated a couple of multitracks in the demo version, so if it's not connected to a hardware unit of ours, it would switch to a demo mode, and you can just sit on your couch in the evening, plug your in-ears with that, and just play around with positioning and just get a feeling for what you like and what you don't like and how you would be working on this. Are you working on features that could allow individualization of Hrtf? Well, it is possible already. So there are two ways. So you could come to our labs and get a measurement of your head, and we would basically give you a custom Hrtf for Klang. That would be quite expensive probably, so as a salesperson I have to say, please do that. You're very welcome. Putting my sales hat off again, that's not necessary. As I mentioned before, with the adjustment, how our brain is basically adjusting to different Hrtfs, no matter if real or real bent or an emulated like it would be in Klang. So by just using it for a few minutes, that would actually adjust your perception of that in a positive way very quickly. Renate, will this video be available online? Yes, that will take a little while. We will, once we did a couple of the next episodes of our Klang webinars, we will put them on Facebook, YouTube, I don't know yet, but that will be coming, yes. Okay, there's another question about DMI Klang. No, simple answer. DMI Klang is always 64 inputs and 16 mixes, no matter even if it's on 48 or 96K. Great, okay, so that were the questions so far, unless there are any new ones coming in. So feel free to play around with that. If you have any streaming concerts coming up, if you have any events like this coming up, and you already use and own a Klang device, integrate that into the network, into your system. Just try it out and play around with the possibilities that you have in there. And I'm sure you're going to like it. Okay, so let's listen to the system again, because there were some wishes coming if I didn't miss them completely. So we just can listen to it for another couple of seconds and play around with some possibilities. Okay, so please wear headphones again.
So many the top. We could be dancing till the music stopped, but I realize I hold on to nothing. So help me out and rescue me before I drown. But I know there is nothing waiting for me. I'm crying out this pain, and it's driving me insane. I'll never be the same again. I'll never be the same. I cried for you so many days and nights, waiting for you. And if we only had another chance, I'd love to hold you in my arms again. But I realize I hold on to nothing.
Okay. Back here. Yeah, I hope I could give you some more ideas on how to creatively use it using our tools. Please stay tuned, follow our Facebook page, because we're far from being done with webinars. We are completely set on just using the time as much as possible and make it worthwhile for you guys who are able to actually educate themselves on some new things. We already did a couple of webinars. One of them was Binaural Basics, where I go much more into the detail on the binaural side and the science side behind our products. We will definitely repeat that a few times over the course of the next days and probably weeks. There's also quite a few other webinars on the way. For example, an app walkthrough where I just explain all the details about the app in both the application as a monitor engineer as well as a personal monitoring system. There will be an in-depth and detailed video about how to set up the integration with Digico consoles. And there will be a whole bunch of more topics. If you have any ideas, if you have any wishes, if you have anything that we could not really address in detail now in this webinar here, please feel free to comment, to send us a message. Generally, just be in touch with us. We are always very, very curious to hear more about how you are working with our systems or how you're intending to do that. Yeah, that's it from my side. Oh, I see there's one more question coming in. Yes, totally agree with you. And basically all the techniques that I mentioned today also work in the studio and in post-production, because if you just record the output that you have in there, the binaural information, the spatial information is encoded into the audio. So you can just replay that and listen to it in all kinds of scenarios and situations. Zeke, you have to come to Germany soon. Right now we cannot come visit you in the US, but yes, please. Food, beer, it's all waiting for you over here. So don't be late. All right. Cool. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope you're all doing well. Please stay healthy. Take care of everyone around you. And wash your hands. I'm sure you heard all of those advices before. They're all very correct and very important, but I don't think I have to repeat them again. Just stay on watch, be careful, and watch everyone in risk groups. And let's make sure to do whatever we all can to just make this mess blow over as fast as possible so we can finally get back on the road. I think we all miss that like hell. So yeah, let's do that. Thank you very much, and hope to see you all in the next webinar that we're doing. And don't forget to just comment your wishes and follow us to get the dates for the next webinars. Thank you guys. Stay safe, stay healthy. Bye.